This podcast is made possible by First Call. Let's end the addiction crisis together. The first step to a future free from addiction is to make the first call.
Good morning, this is First Call. How may I help you?
Call 816-361-5900 or go to firstcallkc.org.
Welcome back to Answering the Call. I'm Bill Brandmeier. I am so excited to be here. This podcast is where we speak to some of the things that most people don't like to talk about. We speak about honesty with compassion and with conviction. I'm your host, Bill B., and this is Emily Hegg. She's here with First Call. She's the executive director of an organization that most people in Kansas City aren't quite aware of the impact that they have. They are an organization that focuses on the prevention and the idea that you want to end the addiction crisis. We want to do this together. Tell people about First Call real quick and just let them know why you're here.
Well, First Call has been working in Kansas City for a very long time, trying to end the addiction crisis and also just be kind of the starting point for what's often a really confusing and hard journey for individuals and families dealing with addiction. And we do that through prevention, recovery, and all different types of work.
I love it. And I have a 37-year history of recovery. So I bring this expertise around what it means to try to live a life in sobriety. We got to meet and talk, and I love this idea of helping First Call tell their story to Kansas City, because a lot of people just don't know enough about what you guys do.
Yep. And so we're working to change that.
Yeah.
So everyone needs to listen and share the
I love
podcast.
it. Yeah, please
I
do.
agree.
Well, today we confront the hard and holy truth that recovery isn't linear, right? And that there is this thing in the new, we often refer to as relapse, but we're learning that we are going to call it recurrence. It's not failure, it's not weakness, and it's never the end of your story. I know that in my life of recovery, when you're dealing with, all different facets of how to be sober, there's a lot of different definitions. A lot of people have different opinions. There's no one way. And there are a lot of times relapse leads you to a greater, deeper level of understanding of who and what you are as you move through life. We have someone here who's on the journey, on the recovery journey, Daniel Kutzberger. And that's German?
Very German.
I love it.
Very German.
He's a man whose journey proves that returning to recovery is not only possible, but it's powerful. And that's kind of why we're here.
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
Daniel, welcome. First and foremost, you work with First Call. Tell me a little bit about what you see First Call doing and why you think it's so important that people know about First Call, not about Daniel. We'll get to Daniel, but
Daniel's going to be tied into this. I hate to break it to you. This has actually been a really interesting journey for me. Back in 2010, my mom actually contacted First Call, right?
One of those parents desperate for help.
Yeah, right. And she took How to Cope classes. They got her contacted with Nar-Anon, which is Narcotics Anonymous' version of Al-Anon, which is for families of loved ones who struggle with alcoholism or addiction, right? And First Call helped her find some resources for me, right? I obviously wasn't ready at that point, but
it helped her.
Yeah, and
gave her language.
Yeah,
and fortified her position of what do I do with my struggling son.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Dude. Yeah, it was
That's
really
so
weird
good.
when I got this job. Everything just comes full circle sometimes, and it was a really full circle experience where it's, I got to see how they have helped in the community and helped those who, didn't really have much, right? I think there is a really large underprivileged area in Kansas City that, does not have the proper resources needed to be able to sustain recovery, right? I think recovery is not just about stopping, but it's about sustaining, right? There's sustainability of recovery, and that's where the recovery advocate, that's my position.
I love it. Okay, so you shyly kind of blushed over something. You said you weren't ready. You said, I wasn't ready. Where were you? Where were you? What was happening in your life, and what were you thinking was What was your truth? Like, where were you?
You know, at that point, I had 2011's the first time I ever went to treatment, right? At that point, I was, it's okay, I'll just smoke weed, right? I was on the weed train,
Okay.
right? Maybe I won't do pills anymore.
Herbolic. You were an herbolic.
Yeah, I was a botanist. And it was an interesting journey, right? I knew I had a problem for a really long time. I was not using the same way my friends were using, right? They did not have the same consequences Daniel had, right? But I was seeing a therapist, this guy named Mark McGonigal. He was really into meditation and all these things that I just really wasn't about at that time in my life, by that point in my life, the overdoses had already happened. I was failing out of school.
Were you diagnosed with ADD?
So at a very early age, I was diagnosed with ADHD and extreme anxiety or anxiety,
Sure.
generalized anxiety, right? I was medicated. I was on ADHD medication when I was 5. By middle school, I was on.
Yeah. So when you were young, your parents
Yeah.
knew they had their hands full. They were like,
Yeah.
Daniel's got some issues.
Yeah.
We're going to help him. And so
Yeah.
your parents helped you figure some things out as you went through, but drugs and alcohol were
Yeah.
very part
There
of
was
your story.
My childhood home was very chaotic.
Okay.
Everybody has something in my house,
Uh-huh.
right? A lot of mental health disorders. It was consistently inconsistent at
Yeah,
home,
yeah.
right?
I know this story. Wait a minute. I've read this book.
yeah, you know where I'm coming from. And at that time in my life, didn't seem like a problem, and it was the situation just kept on getting worse and worse.
And I want to make a little twist that there was love there, though. You were raised in a family that loved you, loved you enough to help you.
Yes, there was love. Love's a funny word for me still.
Yeah, conditional.
There was love. Love was sometimes conditional or contractual.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There was a contractual love in my family.
Parents
Right.
seem to do that. It's hard.
And my mom, my dad generally did care for me.
Yeah,
Right. They
right.
did truly love Daniel.
Right.
They had their own misgivings and they had their own things they were going through. Take me a long time to accept that, but
Sure,
it
no.
is what it is.
Yeah.
They, I wasn't raised in the best environment, but they loved me enough to help me get treatment.
For sure.
Right.
Right.
I thought so. The first time I got clean was when I was 19.
Okay.
Right. So I'm 19. I'm just like, this is just a blip on the radar. This is part of my life, right?
Right.
You're talking
It's what
about
you
staying
do.
clean long term,
Sure.
And
right?
you're talking about you got clean from pills.
Yeah, pills.
Yeah.
Right. So I got out of my first treatment. I was going to go to an NA meeting. I decided to smoke a joint before the NA meeting because that's what you should do.
Of course.
Right.
I mean,
I
gotta get
wasn't
ready, gotta
swearing
get
off
your mind
anything,
ready.
right? And it for me, it was really interesting because shortly after that, I wound up overdosing again, right?
And these overdoses, were they a plea for attention? Were they? Did you want to kill yourself?
Accidental.
Accidental.
Just combining too many medications
Yeah.
together.
Just all sounded good. And
It just wanted to have
Mix it up.
continuously have fun. I was young.
I got
right?
you. Okay.
That was a
and were you searching for the higher high? Is that
yeah, the higher high, and by that point, I had a physical habit, so I had to
Sure.
take a level, a certain amount, to be able to get the desired effect, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, these guys got these other medications, oxys, Ambien, sleep medications. I'm going to take that as well, right? And so that's a lot of how my overdoses happen. But when I say I wasn't ready, there's this, I always considered myself a free spirit, right? I don't want to do what other people tell me. I had a rebellious streak, right?
Yeah.
AA, NA people weren't my people at that point, right? I didn't want to be told that I couldn't use drugs anymore.
Yeah,
I had to go to
uniqueness,
meetings.
Terminal uniqueness.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, I like it.
And I think it was when I say I'm not ready, I wasn't ready. I just wasn't ready to listen. Or,
Right,
I could have definitely been ready if I followed some suggestions,
Yeah.
but there just wasn't, it wasn't in me at that
Okay.
point, right?
These episodes that were overdoses, did you ever see the light? Did you ever do you feel like you were close to death, or did you get
There's I woke up in many of hospitals, right? That one I talked about was the last overdose I had, right? I woke up in the hospital. I overdosed at a friend's house in the middle of the street. I had a seizure. Things got really real really quickly. I woke up in the hospital wondering what the heck happened. They're telling me if you would have taken this much more, you would have died. Right. The last thing I remembered was being in the street, and then I wake up in the hospital. Right. So there's a large portion that day that we're gone. Right. And it's interesting because I had no intention of any of that. Right. Things were going really good in my early sobriety at that point, it seemed like, right?
But marijuana maintenance.
I was still smoking weed.
Yeah. Okay.
That's thank you for pointing that out. Yeah.
Well,
we're nothing if not honest here.
Well, and I think it's important to note that you had parents that cared somewhat. They had their own issues. As best they could. Yeah.
I guess.
They reached out to First Call. They got some, probably some of the things that your mom came back with kind of pissed you off. You're like, well, why'd they teach her that?
Yeah. The no thing didn't exist until she met First Call.
Yeah. I bet that really cramped your style a little bit.
Yeah, she was no longer an enabler.
And then, but you started to hear some truth. You started to hear some solutions in your head. And so you were attracted to the program because you went to treatment at 19 and you heard some things. You're like, okay, I can incorporate that. And, it's like watermelon, eat what you like and spit out the seeds kind of thing, right?
If nothing else, my first experience in meetings was I found a place where people spoke the same language as me, right? I felt very welcomed. The people were warm and comforting, right?
It's funny you say that. I was going to make a point about your language. You're very articulate, and you have a clear understanding of what you've been through and what's happened to you, and you're using appropriate language around it all. And I've been around a lot. I know. I can tell. So we get to this relapse and this recurrence question. New ways of talking about addiction that kind of pop up. Based on trying to soften it for people or whatever, make it easier to
lessen the stigma or liken it more to a medical condition.
Right.
Yes.
So talk a little bit about your familiarity with it all and how you found yourself in a space where you were ready to give back, serve your own addiction in order to stay sober.
Yeah, from that time that we previously talked about until 2016, I went to 9 different treatments.
9. Okay.
There was a lot of stopping points.
A lot of recurrence.
I think the longest I ever got was 8 months, and that was court appointed.
Yeah.
Right.
Were you always in trouble with legally, or did that come later in your
So
addiction?
that actually came very shortly after 2010. So my first charge was in 2011. Right. After I graduated high school kept the lid on some things. Right.
Yeah.
After I graduated high school, obviously I wasn't going to go to college. Drugs are more important than college at that point in my life. Is what I thought. But after I graduated high school, I had so much free time just to sit around and get high and do absolutely nothing.
And did you think I'm going to die young?
I love this. A lot of people say it in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous that there's this idea that I was okay with dying young. This is how Daniel's supposed to die, right? I did not care that much because this felt so good, right? Yeah. Life at that point, life did not seem worth living, right? There was, from 2011 to 2013, it was still relatively fun, right? There was fun with consequences, where, the legal system was involved, right? I cleaned up for a little bit, I was on 2 years of probation. I was only clean for 8 months. That math does not add up at all, right? I found ways around it, right? I would do psychedelics. Anything I could get my hands on, I was going to do, right?
So when that shows that you have some intelligence, right? Because you were able to skirt the system in a negative way, but it's still you're a smart guy. When did you get dumb enough to get it?
So my clean date is.
I didn't mean it that way. But
No, I really enjoyed that because it's the God's honest truth that like I had to dumb it down to a level where it's just stop fighting,
Yeah.
right? Start heeding suggestions,
Yeah.
right? This time was pretty bad. I had been homeless for 2 years prior to getting it this time. So May 5th, 2000, or hold on, May 20th, 2016 is my clean date.
Yeah.
And it's a really important date to me. What led up to it is I have one thing I'll throw in there. Those 9 treatment facilities I went to, I never completed. I had always been kicked out of treatment.
Yeah.
I have never been able to successfully complete a treatment. So it was really, really interesting. I got kicked out of this last treatment, right? And I was homeless again, right? And I was on the streets. And I wanted to stay clean, right? There was a day where I was like crying outside of a gas station,
Right.
holding a white key tag, thinking like I don't want to get high anymore, but what's the option?
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, recovery didn't seem like an option anymore. I thought I had burned that bridge down well before, right? I slept outside of this AA meeting, South Leawood meeting, in the woods outside this meeting for a period of time, right? And it became really apparent to me that the drugs are a problem, but like the way I talk, the way I act, the way I react to situations is probably the problem,
Wow.
right?
Dang.
Yeah.
Do you think that you were able to understand that? Like, how we always say, like, recovery isn't linear and
Yeah.
you're building up this muscle memory. Like, do you think that's true? Do you think that you took morsels of all those 9 treatment
Yeah.
settings?
Yeah, I just like anything else, it's repeated behavior, right? I think there is something I gain from every treatment facility, right? And I said it earlier, if nothing else, I knew there was a place for me to go, right? And be safe, right? For a period of time. It might be a 3-day detox, whatever it may be. Yeah. I was safe, right? I wasn't in a, sleeping in the cold. Wasn't one of those situations, but I could be safe for a little bit. And I don't think I remember much from my first couple of meetings, right? But I knew the location was there, right? And that was an important thing for me. I really had to remove this idea of that I can do this on my own. There is some mathematics that can figure this all out, right?
It's the humility to be able to surrender,
Yeah.
and the willingness to do whatever it takes. Yeah. I sit in meetings a lot with people, and I'm like, he's just too smart to get this. Like, it's like,
Overthink
okay, he's
everything.
got it all figured out. Like, okay, good luck. But it really is true, and I don't mean it like I've got it figured out, because I certainly can't come and say I've got it figured out. I don't have it figured out. Even through my, my sobriety, long-term sobriety, I still am exploring other aspects of my addiction that don't have anything to do with drugs and alcohol, and have to do with processes and how I, interact with the internet or whatever. And I want to be a better person. Now, if I think I've got it, that's when I don't got it. That's, that's the paradox, right?
I'm going to jump back to your question about the reoccurrence, right?
Okay.
Reoccurrence is different these days.
Yeah.
I know we do a lot of harm reduction. People are dying left and right. My reoccurrence might not kill me, but with the substances that are out there, reoccurrence is a very different topic than it used to be, right? And it's always, I was talking about this with somebody the other day. I have quite the network of gentlemen that I get to talk to nowadays, which is really awesome. But this idea of what led to all these reoccurrences was pretty much the same thing every time. For me, it was a lot of, chasing females, right? Unsatisfied with something that happened in my life. I didn't get the job. F it, I'm just going to get high now, right? Excuses, judgments, whatever it may be. That guy looked at me the wrong way, right? Resentments.
Right.
There's so many different reasons why, the reoccurrence or relapse happened, and that's, I say it a lot, doesn't have to be a part of people's story, though, right? I walked a very long path to get to where I'm at. And I put myself through a lot of pain that I probably didn't have to put myself through.
Sure.
Yeah.
You know,
How common do you think your story is? Are there people out there like you suffering every day?
yeah, I think it's a really, you know, I've met a lot of people that have similar stories to mine, right?
I mean, the 9 different treatment centers, there were probably a lot of yous in there, right?
Yeah, I went to same treatments 2 different times, and the same people were there a couple different times, right?
Yeah.
We're back together, high five, you know. And I laugh and I joke about all these things, and it's a really sad issue, you know. But it doesn't have to be. I don't know if addiction's ever going to go away. I don't think addiction's going to just disappear off the face of the earth. It's
I think when you talk about how dangerous recurrence has become, though, so, you know, there's a ton of different theories about why the overdose rate has decreased double digits, and they're thinking 2 years in a row now. And there's tons of different theories about why, and I think, you know, the smart people think it's a combination of all, but the hardest one for me to swallow, and the thing I think about when I hear you and what a miracle it is that you're with us, is this really dark truth of, like, maybe all the people who have been dealing with chronic addiction and who took, you know, got that fentanyl lace meth or whatever that was, maybe they're just all dead. Yeah. And I'm a naturally optimistic person. It's hard for me to reckon with, it's a really bleak reality that we're living in right now. And to think, like, you're sitting across the table from us, but maybe it wouldn't have been that way.
Right.
Is kind of unbelievable for me.
I got really lucky, right? And I got out of it before fentanyl was a huge thing. Thank God, because at the end of the day, opiates became my thing, right? I've lost a lot of friends, you know, a lot of people that I got really close to, I lost. It's a really real issue that's going on, right? I don't, you know, it doesn't feel like it's going down, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Right? You know, there's people overdosing left and right. And that's why I say the reoccurrence is different now, right?
Yeah.
I can't stress it enough. Like, if you're going to get high with somebody else, you know. Don't get high alone anymore, right? If you're gonna do opiates, don't do them alone.
Right.
Maybe that's the best way to say it, but yeah.
But there is a solution, right? I mean, there is a solution, and the answer is finding enough courage and enough strength to admit that you've got a problem, and that you're powerless over that problem, and then that there's a pathway forward. You've invested in 12-step work, I take it,
Yep.
and you said you hung out outside of the AA meeting in South Leawood.
That was my home for many.
Hung out.
That was I would walk into the first meeting, sleep on the couch.
Yeah.
And I did
couches.
that for. They have great couches.
Great couches.
And I did that for a while.
Sure.
You know. But I eventually wound up. I recently have changed to NA, Narcotics Anonymous.
Yeah.
And it's been an interesting change.
That's
you
great.
know.
Well, I'm encouraged the fact that you found a solution and that you're working a program and you've been sober since 2016 and you've taken your talents and you've made something of yourself. You're now working for First Call. Is that right? Yeah.
Working for First Call.
That's pretty cool. When I start thinking about this recurrence thing, I kind of fall into this space. You know, I personalize everything, whatever. But in my marriage, we've worked on what we call rupture and repair.
Mm-hmm.
It's similar if we're on a personal journey, you know, when we do a rupture, that's like a recurrence or a relapse. And then repair is how you get back to homeostasis or to normal. And the process of repair is where you learn the journey. And it just so happens that the 12 steps allows us to find a way to repair, you know, the damage that we've done, clean up the wreckage of our past, you know, because, you know, we've all done things that, you know, we do things, step on the toes of others, and they retaliate. We don't know why, and we're like, well, why me? Why, the excuses. And then you find yourself in this space where you're now operating on a higher plane, right? Talk a little bit about your recovery today and what that higher plane means to you, and what your spiritual connection's like, and how you're using First Call as part of your service and your give back, and how's your life ended up?
My life is absolutely wonderful right now. Let me just start there.
Well, good to know.
I have plenty of things I want to complain about, but it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
It's, in the very beginning, I'm going to drop it back a little bit. In the very beginning, I definitely attempted to not want to work the steps and not do the steps, right?
Mm-hmm.
I kept on trying the old behaviors that are getting me the same results, right? You hear it time and time again. But, once I started really investing in what people suggested I do, my life started to change pretty quickly.
Sure.
Right? I had a job. I found somewhere to live, My parents didn't talk to me for the first 8 months, but that's okay. I had caused them a lot of damage.
Sure.
Yeah.
They had to heal in their own way.
8 months is, pretty good repair.
Yeah.
It came back pretty fast.
In my opinion, they came back pretty fast. But, the ability to be one thing that's really changed, recovery for me is my ability to be honest with others, right? And see the similarities in others, and tell people what's really going through Daniel's head, right?
That's awesome.
There's some real dark stuff that can go through my head that I just want to hold in.
Yeah.
Right. And evidence shows that when Daniel does that, he gets high.
Yeah. Not good results.
Not good results ever. I've never
Yeah.
had a good result from holding something in,
No.
I have a stable relationship today. I have a car. I have a job. Things that I thought I would never have.
Right.
When you come into recovery, it's how free do you really want to be? And I make plans for months ahead of time.
Yeah.
I paid my taxes.
Right.
Things that weren't on the table 9 years ago. Right.
Right.
And that's, I do a lot of pausing, before this, I don't know if you guys can tell I'm sweating a bunch.
You look cool, calm, and collected.
Thanks.
Yeah.
My main temperament is always going to be anxiety. But it's, before this I had to take a moment, and inviting whatever that higher power may be. I'm still on the journey of figuring it out, which is okay, into this, right?
So you talked earlier about your therapist that did some mind work with you, some mindfulness stuff.
Yeah.
Do you still hold that guy in high regard?
So it's mental health and addiction are very close to me. Mental health was full in my house, and so I have my own mental health issues as well, right? I was 5 years clean, and just the steps weren't doing what they needed to do to fix my depression, anxiety.
Sure.
Right? I sought outside help.
Okay.
Right? I met this wonderful gentleman that we went through EMDR therapy. We, we're doing IFS now, which is internal family systems. And so those things it's a constant retraining Daniel's brain, right? I can't just they always say you can't get high on yesterday's dope, right? Which I can't, right? I try to fix today's problem with yesterday's solution, right? All the time, right? And the issue is I'm not trying to do today. I have to do today somehow.
Yeah, be right where your feet are.
Well, and be open to the challenge you're dealing with today is not the same thing, and it's okay not to know.
No.
That's
So
such
true.
a powerful thing that you've normalized for yourself.
That's one of the biggest things I'm working through currently in my recovery and in my life is just not having answers.
Yeah.
Right. I'm a man that loves to have answers. I need an answer, and I need it now. Right.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's just not answers to problems. Right. Sometimes you just have to be patient and wait,
Right.
and those are things that used to freak me out and take me. I might not get high, but I might, isolate, be holed up in my room for a week on end,
Fixate.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Neat. Well, I'm proud of you. Let's kind of go back to the fact that your parents called First Call. I just want to end with this. Where are you with your parents today? And talk about how you look at First Call as that first opportunity for your mom to at least educate herself a little bit on what you might be going through. And is that one of the reasons why you work at First Call, because of that?
To be honest, the job opportunity opened up. I had previously been laid off from another opportunity, and I was just like, I've known about First Call for a very long time. And it seemed like I've only heard great things about people, and I had a friend that just started working there, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to join the team, right? Relationship with my family is crazy different, I'm invited to things. Right. My dad has done a lot of therapy himself, and congratulations to that man, because he's a completely different person.
Neat.
Right. The people that I thought couldn't change have changed as well. And they're a part of my life now, you know. And that's something I didn't understand what First Call was teaching my mom for a long time, or what, the boundaries I didn't understand, because it felt like they were hurting me.
Right.
They were directly attacking me. I don't know who you're messing with, but don't. I really felt like they've impacted my mom in a way that her group of friends today is in a network of women who she met at a Naranon meeting, who was told by First Call to go to.
Yeah.
Right. And it's the amazing thing of her opportunity to change herself, right?
Right.
This disease is a family disease.
And it's like the thing that makes me so proud, and I think, like I said, working at First Call 15 years has been very therapeutic for me as being in family recovery myself. But like the powerful fact of, clearly in 2010, your mom was not going to change your mind about what you were doing, but the fact that she recognized, she didn't need your consent, she didn't need anything from you to acknowledge this was having a deep impact on her, and she didn't have the tools, she didn't have the equipment she needed. And I think so much of the time, families only get drawn in when our loved one decides, yep, I'm going to go to treatment, and maybe there's a little family component, but so often that is not the way the story goes, and that's such a powerful piece of your story.
Right. Well, if you've stumbled, hear me now. Recovery doesn't close the door behind you. It holds it open. And recurrence is part of the process of learning what not to do and how to do the things that we need to do in order to be the best versions of ourselves. And Daniel, you're a perfect example of that. And so cool. I didn't realize that your parents had the First Call background. That's just such a great part of this. It kind of brings it full circle.
Cool. Yeah.
First Call is there, and there are people there to answer the call. That's what this podcast is all about. If people want to reach out to First Call to end the addiction crisis that they're facing, what number do they call?
Our 24/7 crisis call line is 816-361-5900.
If you want to learn more about First Call, go to firstcallkc.org, right?
That's it.
First Call is one of the oldest, most dedicated institutions in our city. One of the oldest nonprofits, founded by what did we learn today? Founded by one of the founders.
Yeah, Marty Mann. Yeah, the
founding
first,
women of
one of the
AA.
first women in Alcoholics Anonymous.
That's pretty cool. And we're going to come back with more stories like this one that are uplifting, but also truthful and honest and real and raw. Yeah. And hopefully you enjoyed yourself, Daniel.
Thank you all for having me.
We appreciate having everybody join us. Please share this podcast with people in your lives that you love, that might want to be a part of it. We'll be back with Answering the Call next time. Still don't have a catchphrase yet, but I'm going to come up with one. Maybe it's recovery doesn't close the door, it opens it. I like it.
I like that too.
All right. Recovery doesn't close the door, it opens it.